Miss Bree, the Dark Diva, and welcome to another edition of our video from the Dark Diva Rules. It's been a while since we've made one, but what we're doing now is we're getting ready for the holidays. I know Thanksgiving hasn't even happened, but that's actually the first of the holidays, and it's coming up a lot quicker than it was. It's kind of like a rushing freight train heading at us. So what we've got to do is get ready, and one of the things we want to talk about is stocking your bar for the holidays. A lot depends on who's on your guest list. Family, friends, neighbors. What do they like to drink? Now again, unless you're really wealthy, you're not going to be spending a fortune. But at the same time, you want something for people who appreciate a particular type of liquor, like whiskey, for example. And we're not talking about the people like a Jack and Coke. Okay, first of all, mixing with soft drinks is ugh. It's not me. I can't address that. But that's the lowest common denominator. Okay. Generally, what you want is a drink that's good for somebody who likes whiskey drinkers, especially. A lot of us like it with just on the rocks or with a splash of water. So we want something where we can, in that case, you're really able to taste the quality, the smoothness, the flavor of the particular whiskey. So we're going to go through the more popular ones. An example, this comes from my own bar, from my laboratory. These are the ones that I work with, I personally enjoy. Now I may add or subtract different things over time, but these are represent a good point of good quality, but they won't break the bank. Okay, so let's get started. What we have is representatives from 4 different classes of whiskey. We have American Bourbon, which the definition for bourbon, it has to be made, and by law, it has to be, technically they say it has to be made in certain areas of Kentucky, but it has to be predominantly corn mash, aged in charred oak barrels. Typically it can be anywhere from 4 years and up, and it can be blended from different agings. So it has peculiar, it's distilled one time. I find bourbon to be a little bit sweeter than, say, Scotch or Irish whiskey or even rye. And of course, down south, it's very popular. I grew up in the South. Right after you're weaned, you usually get your first taste of bourbon. And so that's what we're going to start with. That is tends to be the least expensive, give or take a little bit. But so which ones are we looking for now? Yeah, Jack Daniels and Jim Beam are all over the place. But for me and people that I know who like bourbon, generally you want to start with the lower end of the premiums. And that's where we talk about Maker's Mark. This is Maker's Mark. It's actually made by Jim Beam. It's handmade bourbon, made in small batches. And it's actually very good. It's what we call craft bourbon making has really come on in the last few years, and but there's brands like Knob Creek, Jefferson Reserve. Of course, if you want to spend a lot of money, you can get Pappy Van Winkle, which is way up there. Well, we're not going quite that far. But Maker's Mark is really good if you're drinking it straight. I don't think anybody will turn it down. If you want to mix it, it actually mixes well. If you want to mix it with like eggnog later for the Christmas holidays. Or if you want to mix it with coffee at times, it goes well with these things. It's easy to mix. You can make a Manhattan with it. I've actually had a mule made with bourbon. Now, I had one made with Jim Beam Black, which is not quite to Maker's Mark, but it's close. It's aged about twice as long as regular Jim Beam. It's much smoother, but it works great in a mule, and I found that very surprising. I had that last week in doing one of my happy hour reviews. Anyway, we're going to do a little taste of this. As I say, I find it a little sweeter, a little smoother. It's an easy drinking. It's very smooth, which makes it easy to drink. Whereas some of the ones that aren't aged that long, your basics can have a little bit of an edge to them. And that's typical with any whiskey, or pretty much any alcohol. The higher priced ones, some of them are aged more, they're distilled better, better quality ingredients, lots of different things that differentiate how smooth it is, how well it goes down, what it has for an aftertaste. Now, they talk about tasting notes in all of these. I leave that to you. we all get something a little different, and some of us are a little more sensitive to certain tastes than others. I just find it to be good. I find it to be pleasant, a nice, good taste to it. It's a bit of sweetness, but not super sweet, like a liqueur or anything like that. It's just very smooth going down. It has a nice flavor to it that doesn't leave you going afterwards. Okay, that's Maker's Mark. That's for our bourbon. Highly recommend that, and it's a good mainstay. Scotch, you have choices primarily between blended and single malt. Scotch basically is malted barley or unmalted grain. The better ones are malted. In the malting process for these malted barley, they use peat in Scotland. Has to be made in Scotland. Let's clarify that right off the bat. Scotch has to be made in Scotland. By law, you can't call it Scotch if it's not. It's blended is they take from different distilleries. They're different ages, and they can be made from malted or barley or wheat, rye, whatever. They're blended together. Of that, they're cheaper generally, although you can pay a decent amount for a blend. It depends on what goes into it and how long the aging. So at least we know that at least some of it it's 12 years old. That's Johnny Walker Black. Now there is a Johnny Walker Red. That's a little. I don't think it's as smooth. That's the low end. Or you can go all the way to the top, Johnny Walker Blue, which sells for about $200 a bottle. It's very good. I've had some. Never bought a bottle. Somebody bought me a drink with it. It's good, but I don't know if I could taste the $200 worth. And I don't have the money to see if I can. I don't think most of us do. If I hit the lottery, yeah, we might do that. Or somebody, I get my own show on network television or something. Maybe I'll buy some Johnny Blue. Johnny Walker Black is good. There are others. Dewar's is good. There's Dalrymple Pinch. That's good. It comes in a 3-sided bottle. I just like the black label. It's a decent price. It's smooth. But you will find people have different. Scotch has loyalists like you would not believe. Brand loyalty for Scotch runs deep. And about the ones they like and the ones they don't like. But I think you'll find most like Johnny Walker Black. It's fairly popular. Now, what you will notice with that, it's peaty. That's one thing. Scotch is double distilled, but Scotch, I mentioned earlier with the peat, that gives it a smoky taste. And the more peat they use, like in a lowland, there are two kinds, Highland and lowland. The lowland or Isle Scotch has much more peat in it, and it's very smoky. And if you don't, that's harder, I think, personally, to acquire a taste for. Some people do, and they really love it. I prefer the Highland malts. Johnny Walker's made, it says, from all areas of Scotland, so it's going to be peatier than, for example, the Highland single malt that I have over here. But we're going to start with the Johnny Walker. Yeah, it's smooth, but it's not as smooth as you will find in the single malt. It's smooth, but it's got a lot of peat in it. Again, I like it. I'm used to it as a Scotch drinker, but I would say you might want to look at some other options there as well. I think the single malt's much easier because you can get the Highland single malt whiskey. It's all Highland. Single malt means that it's malted grain or malted barley. It's predominantly from the same distillery. That's why they call it a single malt. It's aged, for example, this is 15-year-old. Now, Scotch is generally aged in used sherry barrels, oak sherry barrels, sometimes bourbon. It can be a mix. This one is a mix. This is Glenfiddich. Now, Glenlivet tends to be probably the more often seen single malt, first level single malt Scotch. It's decent. I've used to drink it because that's what was available in many places. I find it not quite as good as the Glenfiddich. That's a personal thing. Glenfiddich, it's a little deeper. There are some good single malts that won't set you back a fortune. I just like this. Glenfiddich it's a name you can trust. It's pretty easy to find. This is 15, but you can get a 12-year-old. It's still good. Now, if you have money and reasonable amount, if you want to go up to like, I don't even know what it is now. It used to be about $80, but it's probably closer to 90 now. Macallan. And I think it's 12-year-old Macallan. Macallan's very smooth. It's a very good one. I really like the Glenfiddich. It's Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. It is not as smoky peaty as the Johnny Walker Black Label because it's not mixed from different places. It's all Highland. Very smooth, very smooth. A very nice finish to it. Now, again, Scotch is not made to be mixed. There are a few recipes for it. I do not condone mixing your Scotch. If you want to, that's your personal thing. Scotch is best served on the rocks with a splash of water. The water actually does release more of the taste and the aroma, so you can enjoy it more. Don't bury it, don't drown it. Splash. A little bit of water on top. Now, if you're going to be drinking all afternoon, add a little more water. It will stretch it out and keep you from getting too wasted too quick. Nice thing, good Scotch. Any really good whiskey, if you don't drink too much, a lot less chance of a hangover the next day. That varies with the individual, and it does vary with how much you drink, but good whiskey tends not to make you feel so bad. Usually it's the impurities that get to you. So that's the Glenfiddich, that's single malt. It's a decent price point, definitely worth looking into. I should also mention at this point really quickly, wherever you buy your liquor and your whiskeys, package store, ABC stores, some estate stores, ask them there. And especially if you've been dealing with the same one on a regular basis, good source of information and recommendations. What's good? You know, if you don't see one of the ones I'm recommending or talked about, or you want to try something even different, that's fine. But get some recommendations on that. Okay, so that's the Scotch. Next, we're going to move to Irish whiskey. Now, Irish whiskey is triple distilled. It can be made much like Scotch, malted barley, a certain proportion, but you can also unmalted grains can go in it, wheat, rye, whatever. It's aged again in used sherry and oak barrels. The biggest difference, Irish whiskey is triple distilled. They distill it 3 times. Each one of those things makes, now not all, there are some single. I'm talking about the ones that we have here, but as a rule, that's pretty much what they do with it, triple distilled. I find it very smooth. It's very popular in certain areas. Now, I prefer Bushmills, Black Bush, the Black Label, so you can see it there. It's aged a little more than the regular Bushmills. It's like a step up. It's the beginning of the premium, if you will, but it's not that much more. Where I buy mine, it's like a $4 price difference between that and the standard Bushmills. And this is much smoother. It's aged up to 7 years, and again, it's a blend of different pieces that go into it, or different. They age in different barrels and they're mixed together, but they're aged up to 7 years. In again, a mixture of oak and sherry, bourbon oak and sherry oak casks, which again, these impart characteristics to the flavor that you wouldn't get, for example, with the American bourbon is aged in charred oak barrels, but it's first use. Nothing else has been in them. This with Scotch and Irish whiskey, they use used barrels. They're charred oak, but then they've had sherry in them. They've had bourbon in them. So the wood acquires a different flavor, which it imparts to the whiskey as it ages, and it gives it a whole different character and smoothness, flavor profile. All those things go into it. Again, Black Bush. Now, some people are Jamesons. I don't know. I've had Jamesons fine. I've just always gravitated to Bushmills. I like it. I like the Black Bush. I've had Jamesons has some up the level. There's also Tullamore Dew. There's several others that I don't remember the name off of right hand, but I've had. If you have something you prefer, that's fine. This is good. It's just aged a little longer, and I think it's also one of the highest proportions of malted to unmalted grain that you're going to find in this price point. It's like 80% malted grain. That's a lot for an Irish whiskey at this price point, so something else to think Of the three, I find personally Irish whiskey to maybe be the smoothest of the three basic whiskeys that we're talking about. Easily acquired. It's great in Irish coffee. It mixes well with some other drinks that call for whiskey and eggnog, and it's great by itself with some ice and a splash of water, or even shots. Irish whiskey's popular for shots, especially if you have. Excuse me, I don't mean to slur. If you have a predominantly Irish family, I'm sure it's probably pretty popular. So something to think about for that. Finally, the last one we're going to talk about is not quite as popular, not quite as well known, but I thought it worth. These are all from my own collection, by the way. I use these in my laboratory, so I thought we would talk around about it. It's Sazerac Rye. Now, rye whiskey, there used to be a lot of that at one time in America. It's not as popular now, but it's made obviously from predominantly 51% rye to be American rye whiskey. That's the requirement. Now there's like Canadian rye, I think, but it's different standards. This one emulates more like the rye that you would get in New Orleans. The reason for the Sazerac. I use it in drinks that I pay homage to New Orleans with brown whiskey as a base in there, and I like it. It's good. It's a little different. Works good though with ice and splash water. It's good for mixing, but it has a different flavor. It kind of goes off to the side a bit, where these kind of go up and down the scale. It's kind of off sideways a bit. It's interesting. Worth trying if you have some. It's great for Manhattans, by the way. That's rye is good for that. You make an old fashioned with it. Again, lots of things you can do. Interchange brown whiskeys in a variety of different recipes. Probably not as versatile as Irish and whiskey and bourbon, but something to think about. Well, that's been it. Hope you've enjoyed this. We'll be back with more soon. And if you have any questions, look us up. Send me an email at missbree@thedarkdivarules.com. Which is available on my YouTube channel. You can find us on the website, thedarkdivarules.com, that has links to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that. And we'll be back with more on holiday prep and holiday tips for survival. And we're also going to be doing our holiday gift guide, which will be in the blog coming up soon. So stay tuned and have a great holiday season. And always remember, cheers from the Dark Diva, Miss Bree. Thanks for tuning in.